Hi, James. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me on, Grace.
To start off the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So, you started Obvious Venture with Evan Williams from Twitter and another of your co-founder, and you guys have invested in a lot of like really cool companies like Beyond Meat, among others. Why don't we, why don't we like start with like your entrepreneurial journey and then your jump into venture,
Sounds
and what
great.
were some kind of like core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that kind of shape you into who you are today?
Fantastic. Well, Grace, let me bore you and the audience for a minute with, the quick background on me. And then I'd love to talk about why we started Obvious, because I think that's really a key element to the story. But quickly about me, I started my first startup while studying computer science in college. So I'm a nerd, former software engineer that wrote a lot of production code back in the day. That first startup got acquired by Apple, and I spent 6 years at Apple, first as an engineering manager, then as a product manager. And then this thing called the internet was invented. You may have heard of it, Grace. I thought it was pretty interesting, and with some other fellow Apple product managers, we left to start building an internet startup. And that startup was called when.com. It was the first web-based calendar. It was acquired by AOL. After that, I was co-founder and CEO of Ofoto, an online photo service that was very early in the days of digital cameras, helping consumers share photographs on the internet. We grew it to be the world's largest consumer photo service in its day, sold the business to Kodak. I ran it as a subsidiary of Kodak for about 3 years. And then I got recruited by some top VCs in Silicon Valley to run a payments company called Zoom with an X, XOOM. And at Zoom, we were on a mission to help foreign-born immigrants send money back to their home country. They were getting ripped off by a monopoly service called Western Union that I'm sure you've heard of. And we used the internet to give those consumers a better deal, lower fees, more transparent foreign exchange rates. And that mission became our key business driver because they told their family and their friends, and we took a lot of market share away from Western Union, and Zoom had a successful IPO on the NASDAQ. And after Zoom is when I crossed over to venture capital. So that was my entrepreneurial arc. I spent about 2 decades as a founder, a 3-time venture-backed CEO, and then crossed over to the world of venture capital. I've been a VC for almost 18 years, and for the last 10 years, I've been building Obvious. And maybe that's a good segue to tell you about, how I started this with Evan Williams, as you mentioned, who was the co-founder of Blogger and Twitter and Medium. And Evan and I teamed up with our other co-founder, Vishal Vasish. Vishal's an India-born immigrant that doesn't come from the tech world. He spent a decade building Patagonia, the sustainable apparel company. He was the chief strategy officer of Patagonia. And for myself and for Ev, we really have admired Patagonia as a North Star example of purpose-driven business, right? A business whose purpose is to tread lightly on planet Earth and take care of the environment. And so we asked ourselves, why aren't there more Patagonias in the world? And 10 years ago, we joined forces with this contrarian belief. All three of us felt that the most valuable companies of our time will be the companies solving humanity's toughest problems. Think about problems like the climate crisis, chronic disease, income inequality. These are significant, multivariable, intractable problems, and they need disruptive technologies to create new solutions. And 10 years ago, we didn't see mainstream venture capital investing in those solutions. So we said, why don't we start our own purpose-driven venture capital fund? We'll invest in 3 big areas that we call planetary health, human health, and economic health. They map to those 3 big problem sets I just mentioned. And, we coined the term world positive venture capital. That's what we mean by solutions to these tough problems. And that strategy hasn't changed over 10 years. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. We've got 6 public offerings in the portfolio, 16 positive mergers and acquisitions. So now it's less of a contrarian idea because we have a lot of proof points to show that profit and purpose can be a flywheel. You can build a purpose-driven business trying to solve a big problem for humanity, and you can deliver spectacular financial returns along the way.
I wonder, let's start with like what I thought was like very interesting is like you guys had a webinar on generative health, and you obviously published an article on that. And I wonder if you can like let the audience to get to know like that aspect a little bit more.
Great.
You know, yeah.
The term we use is generative science.
Yeah,
And
oh, I'm
it's
so sorry. I mean, I was thinking generative science and then like because we just talked about like the planet
That's
economic
right.
health.
Well,
So I'm like,
health is
yeah,
one key component of generative science for
yeah.
sure, but it's bigger than that. It
Mhm.
spawns a lot of trillion-dollar industries. And the idea of generative science, or Gen Sci, as we like to say, is a simple one. Grace, you're familiar with the revolution happening in artificial intelligence around large language models like ChatGPT. LLMs are trained on the internet. They're trained on text. That's why language is in their name. For Gen Sci, we're backing teams that are building large science models. Imagine an AI that's not trained on text, but it's trained on chemistry,
Mhm.
biology, physics, geology, these areas of the sciences that describe our natural and physical world. And they're very complex, right? The number of possibilities of a protein or an RNA molecule in the human body is vast. It's orders of magnitude greater than the number of atoms in the universe. So no human scientist can explore a search space that large. But AI is actually purpose built to do that. So modern AI applied to the sciences, we believe, is going to be humanity's greatest invention. It's an invention that can invent, and it can output new breakthroughs in chemistry for new battery chemistries, in climate for new sources of renewable energy, in healthcare for new therapies, new proteins, new vaccines. That's the simple idea around generative science. And
Mhm.
we've been talking about this. We've been investing in companies building this. We couldn't be more excited about this because we think it's the most world positive application of artificial intelligence.
I wonder, can you unpack that a little bit more about like, how is a company could be trained like I mean how is like an AI could be trained on science, like in the past like people would fit like content on the internet to train the large
Right.
language model. The content is kind of like existing, and then the science, a lot of it is like about based off like discovery and research paper and related to that. And like I wonder, how do you define like I guess like how do you guys train um using science,
It's a
like
great
how
question. Yeah. I'd love to give you a couple of examples, Grace, and these are startup examples in the obvious portfolio. They are investments led by my brilliant partners who are much smarter than me on these topics. But let's start with a company called Inceptive within the tech bio category. This is sort
Mhm.
of technology applied to biology, and it's been revolutionizing the world of pharma. And my partner, Rohan Ganesh, who's Oxford trained biology and then Harvard Business School, Rohan led an investment in a company, Inceptive, that's building programmable biology. They want to train modern AI to be able to actually program new solutions for human biology. The same way we program software to do new things on a computer. This is a really, really big idea. The co-founder and CEO of Inceptive is well qualified to do this. His name is Jakob Yuskarit. He was the lead author of the Google research paper, Attention is All You Need, that came out in 2017. That paper really invented the modern transformer-based AI that we're all talking about and using with ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot. So Jakob, as one of the founders of the current wave of generative AI, is really working on the next wave of generative science. And his company is starting with messenger RNA, or mRNA. We all know about mRNA because during the COVID pandemic, we had two breakthrough vaccines, right, that were in use. We also know that those vaccines were not the optimal vaccines. They required sub-zero cold chain transportation, And so there's many parts of the world that today still do not have a COVID vaccine because they don't have the infrastructure to transport it at those really cold temperatures. It's certainly possible to have made a vaccine that was stable at room temperature, for example. So Inceptive is working on building an AI that could create these better, more efficacious vaccines with lower side effects. To do that, to train that AI, they have to take atoms, which are RNA experiments, and turn them into bits. So part of the puzzle of generative science is often that you have to build a high throughput robotic wet lab that can run hundreds of thousands of experiments and then synthesize or sequence the results of those experiments into data that can then be the proprietary training data for your generative science model.
I have two questions in that domain. So like one of it is like as an investor, you have come from building a company, sold it to Apple, and then you sold a company to Kodak. Those are like more towards I feel like it's I know that you worked at on the Newton project for like over 6 years, all that kind of things. I know that you are very familiar with like consumer hardware. However, I feel like when it comes to like generative science or the project that you just described, it's more focused on the biotech kind
That's
of
right.
things. And how do you kind of I'm sure your partner would have the expertise in biology, but how do you guys do diligence since like something is like very new to the society, maybe it have never been done before? And how do you verify if something actually has consumer or like I mean commercial legs when it comes to go to market? Um,
Well, you have a few questions in there, Grace. Let's
mhm.
start with sort of, how do we find and diligence these more technical generative science investments? As I think you observed, we are a multi-specialty firm at Obvious Ventures. So I am fortunate to work with a team of specialists. So my partner Rohan certainly knows a lot more than I do about the tech bio space. And so he uses that expertise combined with a network of experts. We have a set of obvious champions that you'll see on our website that are domain experts in their field. They help us with the due diligence and the evaluation of these frontier technologies. So building multi-specialty teams is one part of the puzzle for us, and that helps us build a prepared mind so that by the time we meet a startup, we already know a lot about the landscape, about the industry that they're in. I think the second part of your question was, business model. How do you know if these breakthrough kind of scientific projects are going to be large venture scale businesses? And in the case of tech bio, we actually have a history of success there. Back in 2016, we co-led the Series A of a company called Recursion Pharma. They're now just called Recursion. They're a large publicly traded company. They're the leaders in AI for small molecule drug discovery. And that journey that we went on with Recursion, with the founder, Chris Gibson, and his amazing team, really, taught us a new path for these tech bio companies, which is to partner on various specific projects or specific disease indications that they're trying to solve. They partner with large pharmaceutical companies. And those pharmaceutical companies often help fund the research and development for those potential cures. And if the cure works, the startup and the pharmaceutical company share in the downstream revenues of that product. And that's exactly the strategy that Inceptive, the RNA company we just talked about, they are taking that, and they've already announced their first partnership with a large pharmaceutical partner. And I believe they will have many more to come in the future.
I wonder, so since like I I want to kind of go into the nitty gritty details about this. So let's talk about like, let's say if you partner with one um farmer partner, like what about the rest of the industry? Like would
Sure.
they think that you're already kind of belong to this farmer partner that like you like since like you're gonna like
Good
leveraging the
question.
R&D budget to kind of like getting insights particularly personalized for that partner, like would we be like in a competitive position to also bank you to do the R&D for
Right.
us? Like
Right. I
how does
understand.
that
Yeah. Look, Grace, when you go to the doctor, do you always go for one particular illness or issue?
No. Okay, got
Yeah,
it. So
no, right?
you're
There's just unfortunately a vast set of complexities in human health. And so a tech bio company can partner with a pharma company specifically on a project around respiratory disease. They might forge a different partnership with a different pharma company focused on cancer and oncology. And
mhm,
so the idea of kind of slicing up the research and the partnerships by the problem they're trying to solve. That's a well proven strategy in the world of tech bio. And for these companies they're essentially building computational platforms, right? Recursion built a machine vision platform that can find new small molecule drugs across a range of different indications. That means their platform can partner with different pharma partners to bring those solutions to market.
totally. I wonder, so for example, let's say if you're talking about like an MR blood testing company that like, let's call it like back in time a famous or infamous company that have done that. But like I wonder, yeah. So I wonder if to bring that kind of company to life, what would be your diligence process and what would be in your like commercialized like go to market strategy that you would offer or like you would help the team to kind of adopt if they're working with obvious.
Well, it varies from industry to industry, but I think if I understand your question, it's important to note that we are not a traditional life sciences investor, so we're not investing in companies that are, a 12 PhDs focused on finding one new small molecule to solve liver cancer. Let's just
Mhm.
say as an example, that requires a different set of skills than the skills that we have. So if you take the words biotech and you flip them around to tech bio, that's really about a computation first company. It's this
Mhm.
intersection of computer science and molecular biology. And for the last 10 years, we've been investing in that area with companies like Recursion and Lab Genius, all the way up to our recent investment in Inceptive. So I think the diligence is more digital than it is biological. But as we discussed, we look for those market signs of pharmaceutical companies partnering with these tech bio startups because they want access to that platform, that computational platform that can actually output new breakthrough solutions. So I think an important distinction. And then after we invest, we all have operating experience in our backgrounds. We've worn the shoes of the founder. We really try to roll up our sleeves and act like a co-founder. And often that starts with helping to recruit the leadership team of these startups as they grow, helping to connect them with industry partners for go to market and helping drive their go to market. And because we build these areas of specialization, we build networks that are really valuable to our portfolio companies. And so we just spend a lot of time kind of rolling up our sleeves and helping our founders build.
In terms of like, okay, so I want to kind of like chat more about like the fund strategy. So obviously like, you guys are um yeah, obviously obvious. So you guys are you just mentioned like the three core sector that you care about. In terms of like the check size and like I guess like portfolio construction aspect, like how do you think about like saving for reserves or like double down on certain companies, or do you double down every company that will raise the next round? How do you think about it from like a venture capital perspective, or do you feel like you have a better strength in uh you know um having a more diversified approach? What's your thought framework on that? And then since like I feel like all the no matter, I feel like especially in the biotech or healthcare space or like the tech bio space, there's a lot of capital intensive projects
Sure.
that's
Climate tech also can be capital intensive. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So I wonder, how do you think about it from like a fund manager perspective?
Great question. Well, what's different and unique about us is our world positive strategy. That where I started, that why of building solutions across planetary health, human health, economic health. I believe that's what is very unique about Obvious. A
Mhm.
lot of the other details about us as an early stage venture firm look very similar to other successful early stage venture firms. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel of venture capital. We just have a very unique investment thesis and set of theses, right?
Mhm.
So in terms of check size, to answer your question, we're a Series Seed and Series A early stage firm. Our initial checks are typically between 1 and 10 million. We're investing out of a $360 million fund currently. It's our fourth flagship fund, Obvious Ventures 4. And in each of our funds, we typically build 30 to 35 investments that make up the portfolio of the fund. And for each investment we make, we typically do earmark significant reserves. So if you're a student of history and you looked at what we've done over the last 10 years, we do continue to invest and support our companies after that initial investment. However, we treat each follow-on investment with the same rigor and diligence as if it was a new investment. So I like to think of reserves as a fund within a fund in venture
Mhm.
capital, right?
Mhm.
So not to get too, venture geeky, but if you have a, $100 million fund and 50 million of that is held in reserves, you really want to think about every dollar you're using from that reserves pool. How are you underwriting that? What sort of multiple do you expect to get on those reserves dollars? Right? Because
Mhm.
that's really, really important for driving strong returns for us and our limited partners.
For sure. I wonder when it comes to like, picking the companies, like you mentioned about like, obviously the
I
incept so
I
the
have an
team.
insect chasing me here.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. So we chat about like, the one of your portfolio company, they're coming out of the Google people who wrote the AI top like AI paper. That's
Yeah,
like a really good indicator of like the person's technical ability.
that's right.
When you're evaluating the team, there's also supposed to be like the business acumen of the founder or the founding team. Um, how do you kind of quickly evaluate if a person is have like the kind of go to market chops to, since like I feel like a lot of the top technical talent doesn't have the storytelling ability. Um, what's your thought process on evaluating the business side of things?
Well, let's see. I guess a couple of thoughts. One is that depending on your definition of quickly, we're not super quick on that. If there's a deal that requires a term sheet in 24 hours, it's probably not a deal for Obvious. We
Mhm.
tend to do a decent amount of due diligence on the team and the technology and the market opportunity. And specific to the team, you mentioned storytelling. One of our superpowers is backing technical founders and then helping them with the storytelling. And storytelling is really important. It's important for recruiting. It's important for go to market with customers. It's important for fundraising for the next round.
Mhm.
And so we do a lot of training and partnering with our founders on the area of storytelling.
Mhm.
So that doesn't have to be perfect when we invest. That's an area where we can actually help our companies improve. I do think, though, to your question, we love to find these canonical founding teams that have a mix of technical talent and business expertise. So if you're building a renewable energy company and you're planning to sell to energy utilities, we look to see, do you have someone on your team that has some experience doing that, that maybe has an existing network and set of relationships or partnerships that's going to accelerate your advantage in terms of actually going to market and generating revenue.
In terms of like, when a person is with a very significant background, like you mentioned about the Google research, Google researcher, they have like written like a famous paper. Those are typically chased by a lot of other investors. And I wonder, what's your thought process on like winning deal as well as like in terms of the valuation? It seems like they typically got like a lot of pretty big checks in general
Yeah,
when they're coming from like a really famous place or like ex-employee of a top startup or something.
sure.
I wonder what's your thought process on having a reasonable valuation as well as like being competitive in like, going into the deal uh with the company?
Well, valuation's a hot topic in venture capital, and we certainly see the world of AI living in a very different neighborhood of valuations than almost everybody else. If we go back to generative science, this our thesis on AI is somewhat contrarian and different. I think most of venture capital is chasing enterprise AI, right? Using AI and large language models for enterprise productivity. Enormous value will be created there. It's also enormously competitive. We're working on large science models to drive new breakthroughs across, you know, climate tech and human health and tech bio. It's frankly, I think, less competitive there. So I think in general, other verticals that are not the sort of mainstream enterprise software can create better, more reasonable pricing opportunities for venture capital. I think in terms of how we win or when we win, because we don't always win, but we ask our founders, in a competitive round, you had 7 term sheets. Why did you choose Obvious? The top 2 answers we get are number 1, operating experience, the fact that we've done it before, we've worn the shoes. So that gives us some experience, but also some empathy because founding a company is a really, really hard job. It's like defying gravity. It's like getting
Mhm,
escape velocity, putting a rocket into orbit.
mhm,
It's really hard. Number 2 is values alignment. If you're a founder trying to reverse type 2 diabetes or you're a founder trying to fix Medicare, Medicaid in the healthcare system, or you're a founder trying to scale renewable energy to help fight climate change, you're purpose driven. And you probably want investors that are aligned with that purpose in a very authentic way. Picking an investor is like picking a spouse. It's a
mhm.
10 to 20-year journey. So you want to choose carefully and you want to make sure it's someone that is truly values aligned with you as you go on that journey. And I think that's where Obvious really shines, and that's where we often win.
I wonder when it comes to like thinking about how the money flow in the planetary health as well as human health and economic health. Why don't we start with like planetary health? How do you think the money is like flowing in the industry? Also, climate tech is like making a major comeback this year. What's your thought process on like why it is happening and what would be the major leading factor to like um, what kind of like startups will, thrive in this new revolution of climate tech?
Well, we have a lot of rich history here. My partner, Andrew Beebe, who's a managing
Mhm,
director on the team at Obvious, excuse me, I first met Andrew in the 90s when we were both Web 1.0 tech CEOs.
mhm,
In the early 2000s, he left the internet industry to go become a solar energy entrepreneur. So
mm,
he's been working in renewable energy since way before it was fashionable.
mhm,
And he actually built a company that was sold to Suntech, and he was the chief commercial officer of what became the world's largest photovoltaic module manufacturer. He also ran distributed energy for Nextera, one of the largest utilities in the United States. He built a distributed renewable portfolio of solar and wind and battery storage for Nextera. So he really knows all aspects of the sort of climate tech stack. And since our very first fund, we've been investing in planetary health. So we've seen a real shift, Grace. In our first fund, when we made a planetary health investment, our key question was, where are we going to get the next round from? Because there
mhm,
was so few investors in the space and it was hard to find follow-on capital. So we
mhm,
either had to underwrite to getting to profitability, or we had to have a really good thesis of how this company was going to be able to access growth capital after us. That has really changed. A lot of new capital has come into the climate tech space. A lot of large business is realizing that decarbonizing the global economy is going to be a big business. And McKinsey's forecasting multiple trillions being spent on that in the next decade. So a lot of eyes are now on climate tech, on decarbonization. I mentioned we've had a lot of positive exits in the areas of electrifying transportation, building charging networks for electrifying fleet vehicles. Those have been areas of success for us. We've had success in the areas of accelerating the deployment of solar energy through software. So over the years, we've done a lot in this space. We've seen a lot of new capital show up. That's
Mhm.
probably a double-edged sword. I think it's net positive for us because we now have a lot of firms that we work closely with where we can either co-invest in a company that maybe is capital intensive and needs more capital if they're manufacturing something. We also have relationships with a lot of growth stage climate tech funds that want to invest after us. And that's really, really useful in terms of having that follow on source. The downside is valuations have certainly increased, but we try to maintain price discipline. And sometimes if we lose a climate tech deal, it's because we lost on price. We were unwilling to pay what we thought was an irrational valuation. But overall, good news. The world needs these solutions, and we're seeing the capital come into that space. Before we leave the topic of planetary health, Grace, I promised you two examples of generative science,
Mhm.
and I want to get to the second one, which is within planetary health. My partner Andrew led an investment in a company called Zanskar. That's with a Z, Zanskar. Zanskar is a geothermal energy company, meaning they want to accelerate the ability for us to build utility scale power plants using the heat of the Earth's core that we can access by drilling through the crust of the Earth. Geothermal is very common in places like Iceland or Indonesia, where that energy is easy to tap. It's close to the surface. But here in the United States, it's harder to find. But if you can find it, it is a very safe, very constant, scalable source of energy. And there's more than enough energy inside the earth to power humanity for millions of years. We just don't know where to find it. And it's expensive to drill to find these geothermal sites. And historically, the success rate of those experimental drilling sites has been 1 in 10, which is not a very good economic formula for utilities if you're going to fail 9 times out of 10. What Zanskar has done is a perfect example of generative science. They've trained an AI model on geologic and seismic data. Again, a very, very large multidimensional search space. It's very hard for a human brain to find patterns across such a disparate set of data, but AI is really good at that. And their AI is already outperforming the top human geoscientists in finding a treasure map for where to drill for geothermal energy. We think that's going to unlock a bunch of new low cost green energy for the US grid. And it's going to show up just in time because the rise of artificial intelligence is consuming so much power. We're forecasting that we need to double the amount of electrons on the US grid. That is a huge, huge amount of new energy generation. At Obvious, we want to make sure those new electrons are green. And that's why we invested in Zanskar. We think this is an example of using AI to build a treasure map to find new locations for low cost, scalable, renewable energy.
I am very so I'm very curious about like, when you guys are finding these deals, where would you look for high quality deals in this domain? Because I feel like it really takes very specific expertise as well as it's like not that obvious as a, obvious venture metaphor. But anyway, so I feel like it's not a very obvious domain to like kind of like research on since like we're living in the ecosystem of like SaaS AI dominantation. When you are thinking about a company like Zanskar, what's a business logic behind it? Like, who are they selling it to? Like, and then what kind of like unit economics the company have to kind of like reach, or like, do you feel like that's just doesn't really matter at the very, very beginning stage as you're investing in the seed or um, you know, how do you think about the business aspect of things when you are looking at these very niche companies and when I mean, maybe they're not very niche in their niche,
Yeah.
but I wonder, how do you quickly filter out what's something that's worth looking at?
Yeah,
Looking
I think you asked two very different questions,
Yeah.
which is sort of how do you find these, amazing venture scale companies? And then separately, how do you diligence the viability and the business opportunity? Do I have that right, Grace?
Yeah, correct.
So, on the first part, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you
Yeah.
read the Obvious Ideas piece that my team and I wrote about generative science, right? It's called our contrarian idea for AI. And entrepreneurs read those pieces that we publish as well. So sometimes they find us because we've built up some area of domain expertise,
Mhm.
right? If you're working in climate tech, you're probably going to find my partner Andrew Beebe. He's very, very well known. He's been investing in that space for decades, right? If you're working on a plant-based protein company, you're probably going to find me because I led our investment in Beyond Meat.
Mhm.
For plant-based meat, our investment in Miyoko's Creamery, which is plant-based cheese and butter.
Mhm.
So these are what we call flywheels at Obvious. When we start to
Mhm.
build a group of companies that have breakout success in a category, then the next wave of entrepreneurs often seek us out. So that's necessary but not sufficient. We also do a lot of hunting where we build a thesis where we have a particular idea of where we think the world is headed. My partner Vishal built a thesis early on about the change in healthcare from fee for service to value based care and started market mapping all of the different entrepreneurs and companies and understanding what the large incumbents, how they'll change, how policy will change. And that led him to really go out and hunt and find some amazing portfolio companies like Verta Health, like Devoted Health, like Tomorrow Health. So the thesis driven work that we do often leads us to go hunt and find these companies. We build relationships with angel investors, with pre-seed funds. We're looking for that whole ecosystem of who invested before us in those very, very early rounds that could be signal for us to then go find that great seed stage or Series A company.
I wonder, I mean, obviously, I think those 3 are, like, very great, like, generally, like, good, like, sourcing opportunity, um, pipeline, and I wonder I feel like in terms of, like, when you're attracting a lot of people come to you with their ideas, one of the challenge would be, like, how do you quickly filter out what idea matters? I know
Mhm.
that having a prepared mind matters. How do you kind of shape your, mental map
Yeah.
to having kind of, like, a like, basically, how do you educate yourself in the space? I'm sure it's by chatting with a lot of entrepreneurs, but how do you kind of, like, formulate it into investing mental mind map? And, like, how many companies do you have to see in a particular sector to be like, "Okay, I feel like this is something that's really interesting." Obviously, there's a lot of, like, interesting product in different space. How do you identify who have what it takes? Because I feel like a lot of the by looking at, for example, I'm just currently looking at the, Zanskar team members, like, maybe they're like a research fellow somewhere in the past, and how do you know if they can turn that into a business? Because, we're sitting in Silicon Valley, like, there's so many amazing science are coming from the Stanford, Berkeley of the world. How do you quickly identify who has what it takes to build a, business?
Yeah. Well, when we're evaluating a vast number of investment opportunities, as you alluded to,
Mhm,
the first filter for us is our world positive North Star. It's
mhm,
really powerful to know what you are not going to invest in because you can say
mhm,
no very, very quickly. So if someone comes to us with a weaponized drone company, that just doesn't fit our world positive thesis, right? Maybe a more subtle one might be an online gaming or online gambling company. There have been great large scale venture returns across those categories, but we can only write 30 investments in a fund. We want all of those to be solutions. So there are a bunch of things that we would maybe deem more world neutral that are not going to fit our world positive thesis. So that's like the most important filter that we start with. And then one level down, our whole team, we have, we have 4 investing partners, we have 4 principals as well on the investment team. We're all working together around a set of investment theses that we talk about and that we develop together. And those are the next set of filters of, does this fit our thesis? Is this how we see the world in terms of where insurtech is heading, or where consumer food is heading, or where electric mobility is heading? And those are really important filters for how we can kind of sort what we spend time on. And then to the second part of your question, Grace, when we do find something that's on thesis and we're spending time, we really use that network, that industry network that I mentioned, where we can do our own customer research, potential customers, to see if maybe what the founders think is must have in terms of what they're building. We can go fact check that with potential customers to see whether that's something they really need and they're willing to pay for, or maybe it's on the should have or the nice to have list.
Mm.
Similarly, we do a lot of work referencing teams and understanding the caliber of the team. Do they have that sort of special something to get escape velocity, to go from an idea to taking market share to, reaching profitability and beyond, and driving venture scale returns? It's the how of that is probably longer than we have time for on today's conversation, but at the highest level, we're always trying to answer that question, and we do a lot of diligence work to answer it.
When, let's say, we're just gonna use like maybe Zanskar as a example. Like, I guess when you mentioned about like talking to the customers, like who would be they be selling it to? Would it be the government, or would it be like, other energy companies, or would it be like the Tesla of the world? So, like, how do you kind of like segment the customer profile to evaluate the company like Zanskar?
Yeah, I don't want to talk in detail about their business model
Oh
because
yeah,
they
yeah, yeah,
they
for
they
sure.
haven't revealed all of that yet.
Hmm.
But I can tell you that my partner Andrew, again, from his time as a utility executive, he has a deep understanding of what the options are for you. Let's say a utility company needs to generate 20 megawatts of new power to power an AI data center.
Hmm.
Well, they have some proven options to do that. They could build a natural gas plant, and they know what it costs to build that. They could try to build a solar or wind asset, but they would need a lot of battery storage to take that intermittent energy and make it constant for kind of grid constant power. And there's a lot of well understood history of geothermal, and it actually is a very, very sought after asset if you know where to put it. And that, so knowing that that's been the hardest problem, and for us validating that Zanskar has an AI system that no one else has for building those treasure maps at the simplest level, I think, Andrew and the team here at Obvious were able to gain conviction that that's going to be enormously valuable.
Mm. I wonder, so in terms of like, for example, your one of your portfolio company is Beyond Meat.
Yeah.
Um, and then you recognize it like, a long time ago before, we have it on the food table right now. And I wonder, can you share a little bit more about like, what was your thesis back then
Yeah.
about finding Beyond Meat? And then there's also a lot of Beyond Meat competitors. Like, I mean, obviously it's nowadays like we can kind of like talk about like in the past, like maybe there was yeah, some like other ones that like we didn't know. How do you kind of like see Beyond Meat was um very successful among these other competitors? And
Yeah.
yeah.
I, I'd love to give you 2 examples that go back to our first fund. And Beyond Meat's one of them, and they're examples of what I call time machines. I think, early stage venture capital is like building a time machine,
Mhm.
because you're backing a group of founders that are piloting some new technology, and it's going to take them years to build it and bring it to market. And you have to forecast, when will the consumer be ready for this new disruptive change? And
Mhm.
those are the knobs and dials of the time machine. So in the case of Beyond Meat, my co-founder Ev Williams found that company long before I did. He had
Mhm.
personally invested in the early stage of Beyond Meat before our fund existed. And then
Mhm.
when we created Obvious Ventures, we then started doing the follow-on investing from the fund.
Mhm.
And the thesis was really around this intersection of what was happening with better for you food, where
Mhm.
people were starting to realize that what you eat is connected to human health and it's connected to planetary health. And when we looked at fighting climate change and we looked at where are human created greenhouse gases, we found almost half of them were coming from the stack of industrial agriculture. So, petroleum-based fertilizer to grow corn and soy to feed to cattle, which produce vast amounts of methane. Those cattle then need a lot of energy to then be slaughtered, and then diesel fuel for refrigerated trucks to transport them. When you add up that stack, we found that bovine agriculture, cows, was a really, really big part of the problem set.
Mhm.
And so we asked the question, well, we're feeding plants to these ungulates that then turn the plants into a different kind of calorie. Could we cut out the middleman? Could we just make delicious, nutritious food products straight from plants? At a first principles level, it should be cheaper to do that at scale than to grow the plants to feed to the animals, because we know the conversion ratio of calories is very inefficient.
Mhm.
And so when we met, when Ev met Ethan Brown and his team at the early days, he was really captivated by the vision that Ethan had to create a new kind of protein company that could create delicious center of plate protein that was 100% made from plants. So that was the thesis, and the time machine part was, well, when would consumers be ready for that, and when could this company create something that had the taste and texture of, you know, a cooked chicken breast or a cooked beef burger on the grill.
Mhm.
And frankly, the company had a few tries that were not perfect
Mhm.
before they got to the Beyond Burger. That was the breakout product that really took off. Dunkin' Donuts put it on the menu. Carl's Jr. put it on the menu. It was showing up in quick service restaurants.
Mhm.
We launched initially at Whole Foods, and then we went very, very mainstream to grocers worldwide. Now carry the Beyond products, and I think it's an example of getting the timing right, where we were reaching a consumer that was not a hardcore vegan customer. They were a consumer that wanted to cut down on their consumption of animals. Maybe their doctor told them it was bad for their heart. Maybe they were worried about climate change. Whatever their driver, that was a cultural shift, and we got the timing right.
Mm.
The second example I want to mention is a company called Diamond Foundry, and this was an Obvious Ventures One investment. The founder of Diamond Foundry is an entrepreneur that I've known for several decades. He goes back to the Internet 1.0 days, and he and his PhD level team had a crazy idea that they could build plasma reactors, these devices like the size of two refrigerators that could heat up a ball of plasma hotter than the sun in a vacuum chamber and realign carbon atoms to grow pure diamond in a laboratory. And they could do it with renewable energy to create carbon neutral diamonds. So that was the crazy idea. And when we thought about that idea and we analyzed the diamond market, just starting with gem quality diamonds, right, for
Mhm.
jewelry, it's a very large market. And the vast majority of those diamonds were mined from the earth, which has a huge carbon footprint. It does huge environmental damage, and for certain sourcing locations, like diamonds mined on the African continent, there's a lot of other negative externalities, child labor, child slavery attached to that industry historically. And so we thought if we could take those negative externalities and flip them into a diamond company that actually used renewable energy and made carbon neutral diamonds that were really like a carbon sink. They were taking methane out of the air and turning it into pure diamond. That was a really, really big world positive idea. And roll the clock forward, Diamond Foundry is now the world's largest lab grown diamond manufacturing company. They have a subsidiary that's a consumer engagement ring brand called Vray that's very successful here in the US. And they now are growing diamond large enough to grow diamond wafers. They announced the world's first diamond wafer for semiconductor chips. Diamond is a miracle material. It has the best heat transfer of any material known to man, which means we can use it on the back of chips to move the heat, disperse the heat from these high heat chips like AI chips, like data center chips, like 5G cellular chips. And that's been a huge problem in the semiconductor industry, that now Diamond Foundry may have very disruptive solution to solve that heat problem. That means we'll need less energy to run air conditioning in our data centers, which is actually the biggest part of the energy consumption in data centers. So it will be hugely beneficial to planetary health. It's an example of a really deep technology that will have really, I think, profound positive benefits for humanity.
I wonder. So I feel like those two are like some really great example of like looking at things in a very different lens instead of like the traditional like Silicon Valley lens. I wonder. I have like two questions around that line on like when you are filtering. First of all, like let's talk about like building a team at Obvious Venture. Oh, by the way, I want to quickly say hi to the audience. Hi, Emin. So basically I think one of the question would be like when you're building up your team, you have like obviously partnered with like the Twitter founder as well as the Patagonia executive. You kind of put the team together. When you are finding the domain experts, like you mentioned, your partner
Like
Andrew, or go ahead,
Rohan.
like
Yeah.
yeah. So when you are finding these talent, like where would you look, and then how do you kind of like attract the talent beyond the mission? Obviously, mission is like extremely important. How do you kind of create the work environment for people to kind of collaborate in like among the team? Does each person lead their own deal, or like do they share the industry trends on like every Monday or something? Like what's your like processes as like the quote unquote CEO of the fund to like put the team together and then make sure it like functions? And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a great question,
Oh,
Grace.
also, yeah, I will address your question later, Amin. I think it's a good question too.
Well, to answer the team question, we're sort of an old school style venture firm in that our fund sizes are under 500 million. I know that sounds like a big number, but that's small in venture compared to a lot of shops that are raising these large multi-billion-dollar funds that are hiring hundreds and hundreds of employees. We're small by design, and so we have a relatively small team. That allows us, I think, to be very, very picky, selective, and we hire very slowly. And we've been fortunate, I think, to recruit and retain some amazing humans on the team at Obvious. Certainly feel lucky when I wake up in the morning that I get to work with the team that we have here. And I think culturally, our team all connect with our world positive mission. So there's sort of this Venn diagram of a caring and kindness and purpose driven aspect to what we do. That's not true across all of venture capital, right? We want to drive great financial returns for our LPs. We also want to drive positive impact for the world. So we have a team that wants that, but that overlaps with a set of expertise of winning in business. We have operators that have built very large brands and large success story companies. We have people on the team that had previously been at large, successful venture capital funds earlier in their career. So we have folks that have brought a lot of existing expertise from learning venture at some other storied places. So at the highest level, I think we've been fortunate, and we hire slowly, and we look for folks that are at the intersection of that Venn diagram.
I also wonder, like, what is a so for example, there's a lot of obvious champion. Are they like also maybe are they LPs of the fund, or are they more of like a venture partner, or like how do you kind of like shape the obvious champion
Yeah.
ecosystem to help portfolio company to thrive?
That's a great question. I love our Champions program. We rolled it out a few years ago at the start of Obvious Ventures 4. And what we did, Grace, is we basically went out in our networks and we aimed really high to go find some of the most successful people in the thesis areas that we invest in. And we asked them, "Hey, would you like to be a champion?" Which simply means you get to work with our portfolio founders. You get to meet the next generation of entrepreneurs in these domains that you have deep, deep expertise in, and you get to mentor and help them. And we were fortunate to get some amazing people on on our champions list. You can see them on our website on obvious.com, and you'll notice they really line up across our three areas of planetary health, human health, and economic health.
Would they be so obviously like helping and like the mission driven purpose is like very important, but would there be like, I guess like alignment would there be like as working as a board member of the portfolio company, or would it be like, more on the, you know, just like portfolio companies would like be distributing into, maybe I saw some of them are like, leading very large companies, maybe selling their product to these companies, like how would you kind of like helping the business kind of like progression kind of happen within the champion network? Or maybe that's not a goal, that could also be it.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about champions and venture partners because I think champions are a lighter touch, but they're really like advisors. So,
Mhm.
you've probably talked to startups that have had advisors that made a
Mhm.
really key introduction to a VP hire, or a really key introduction to a potential customer,
Mhm.
or gave them a really important piece of strategic advice to say, look, before you put 75% of your engineering resources on building that thing on your roadmap, I can tell you why it's not going to work because I've been there and I tried to build
Mhm.
that and here's what I learned, and maybe you should change that and build this other thing instead. That kind of expertise and advice is really, really valuable to founders, and that's what we're trying to deliver with the champions. We have also had venture partners over the years at Obvious, and venture partner is a term of art in venture capital. It means different things for different people.
Mhm.
We've had some venture partners that are fairly arm's length. We've had some that are full time on the team. For example, when we first started the firm, my co-founder Vishal recruited Sami Inkanen as our first venture partner. Sami was the co-founder and president of Trulia, the real
Mhm.
estate website that had a successful IPO. And after taking Trulia public, Sami became very, very interested in health tech and this intersection of technology and human health, and was helping us evaluate a lot of startups within that space.
Mhm.
While doing that, he got really excited about a new solution, a new approach to type 2 diabetes, which at the time was a rising chronic disease epidemic,
Mhm.
metabolic disease. And he said to Vishal and I, said, look, I've teamed up with these amazing doctors and I'm going to start a company. And our mission is to reverse type 2 diabetes in 100 million people by the year 2025. And that company is called Verta Health. We were his very first check, and he's been hard at work building that company. It has hit many milestones of
Mhm.
amazing success. Verta is now valued, still private, but valued over $2 billion. They're working with large insurance companies to help manage type 2 diabetes patients. They're working with the new craze of GLP-1 drugs to um, help health systems work with those patients and create an off ramp for them when they transition off of GLP-1 drugs to have a sustainable way to maintain their metabolic health and keep their diabetes in remission. So
Uh,
that's an example of a venture partner that then went on to found a company, and that company became a portfolio company at Obvious.
I wonder, so another like I feel like I also noticed that you have phenomenal storytelling skill. What's your advice for people to have a better storytelling skill? Since I feel like that's a key to, recruiting, to like winning a deal, to like essentially life in general. I feel like you have such a phenomenal like articulation in different things, as well as like you're very educated in different space that your firm invests in. Even like maybe those are like not
Even
that
though they're not
you lead the
my
deal. Yeah.
personal field.
So
Yep.
how do you quickly educate yourself in the industry that's in your big umbrella of obvious domain? And like how do you kind of like go deep into each one of them to educate yourself? I guess
Well,
that's the
let's
question.
start with your question about advice, because I think that's hopefully this interview we're doing is going to help founders, and that's a big part of my day job, is helping founders. Advice I have around storytelling for tech startups in particular, number one is don't be boring. I think,
Mhm.
whatever category you're in, it's a sea of sameness. Everything looks the same. Everyone's saying the same thing. Everyone's promising the same features and benefits. Find a way to stand out. Make it interesting. Number two is be authentic. I think some of the greatest founders have a personal story. Sami Inkinen, who I was just telling you about, he won the World Ironman in Hawaii and then was diagnosed as pre-diabetic. He said to his doctor, "How is this possible?" And his doctor said, "I don't know. Our normal advice is you need to exercise more and lose some weight. But you just won the Ironman. You're like a top athlete in the world." And that personal story is a big part of Sami's journey and his purpose and his storytelling about how he recruits a team and gets customers and partners excited about Verta Health. So being authentic, finding ways to get that purpose, that North Star that's driving you, and then authentically make it part of your story.
Um, any like book or like webinar that like you would recommend in that matter?
Yeah, there's a book that I am recommending that just came out. It's called Cultures of Growth by Mary Murphy. And it's a book about growth mindset, which is something that, has been sort of in the ethos of team building and personal development for many years. Um, Mary worked with Carol Dweck at Stanford, who first kind of pioneered that growth mindset. The book Cultures of Growth is about how to take that growth mindset and develop it across organizations. So it's really, really great for anyone that's leading a team or leading a company and building an organization, and you want that culture of growth, of learning. So I highly recommend that book.
Uh, like what about for like storytelling related things?
Well, for storytelling, there are some marketing classics. These are not new books, but there's a book called Positioning: The Battle for the Mind. Um, Jack Trout and Al Reese are the authors. This was a really like foundational book for me in terms of understanding how you position a product or a brand or a company. And a second book, a marketing book that I love by Seth Godin, is called The Purple Cow. It's all about this idea of don't be boring and stand out and find a way to be authentically different. So both of those come to mind as well.
Okay, so where is the last 1 minute fire round for you? So you already answered the favorite book question. Um, who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh, wow. Living or dead?
It's your party.
It's my party. Okay. Well, I think I would invite Leonardo da Vinci and Sam Harris and Albert Einstein, and we'd have a really interesting discussion about whether we have free will or not in what we know of as conscious reality.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Wow, this is a long story, but I'll try to make it short, Grace. I had a high school teacher that was a mentor. His name was John Hughes. He's long since passed away, but he worked on the Whirlwind at MIT, which was one of the very first computers. It was in a race with the ENIAC computer at University of Pennsylvania. So I just lucked out in having a high school teacher that was a founding father of computer science, and he took me under his wing and taught me programming at a level that most colleges weren't even teaching, and that just really changed where I went to college, and it just changed the arc of my career. Um, Later in life, when I was CEO of Ofoto, I was asked to come do a guest lecture at Brown University, where I studied computer science. And when I came back to Brown, I discovered that one of the faculty members at the time was also named John Hughes. And I reached out to him and said, "Are you by any chance the son of John Hughes from Marion, Massachusetts?" And he said, "As a matter of fact, I am." And we just spent a great afternoon reminiscing about his father, and what an amazing human he was, and how both of us had life-changing experiences through that human.
Wow, that's so crazy. Who I'm also it's like it's a really beautiful full circle
Yeah, it was
story.
really a full circle story of mentorship.
Um where can we find you outside of work?
You can find me on Twitter at James Joaquin. You can find me on LinkedIn. And you can DM me on either of those places. And then you can find me my personal life. I play the drums. I'm a drummer. So love to play music, love to see live music. I'm also a sailor, so you might find me sailing out on the San Francisco Bay.
Amazing. Thank you, James, for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation. I feel
Thanks for
like we
having me,
shared
Grace.
a lot of
We covered a lot of
amazing
ground.
for sure. By the way, for the audience who are still watching, I will be speaking at a family office and fall panel later on today, and please join. Thank you.